Welcome back to the live stream. We're here today with a very difficult topic. I remember when my children were little, thinking about talking to them about wars, about death, about humanitarian crises was deeply painful. The sense of loss of innocence. And I really struggled with that as a parent. How do I help my children deal with what's happening in the world that's often brutal and painful? And how do I bring that up? Do I bring that up? Today, we're going to be talking with colleagues from the Emotional Intelligence Network in Europe who are educators, emotional intelligence educators, parents, and looking at these questions of how we grapple with the emotions, our own emotions as parents and educators, and the children's emotions, and how we can find the space, find the emotional fortitude to be able to engage compassionately in these intensely painful topics. And so I'd like to welcome two of our panelists in, and hopefully we'll have another panelist joining us soon. And I would like to ask you each to introduce yourself, and maybe you could start by telling us what is one feeling that you have when it comes to this question of how do we talk to children about the war. Ruth, can we start with you?
Okay, certainly. Hi, guys. I'm Ruth. I'm in the UK, in the northeast of England, and I'm the head teacher of a school for infant children. So that's, we have a nursery that goes from the age of 3, and our children leave at the age of 7. We're a big school, 350 or so children. And I think for me, because of the setting in which I work, the way that I've had to, or I've encouraged my staff as well to approach this subject is carefully, because we have to spend a lot of time as well thinking about parents' responses, because parents at this stage also are grappling with their own emotions and figuring out how they're going to explain this to the children. So for us, it's very much been a case of being careful about how we approach it.
And Elke?
Yes, hi. Yes, so my name is Elke. I work as a trainer and as a professional coach. I mainly work actually with the international organizational world, let's say the bigger UN family, in the area of career, communication, self-leadership, and emotional intelligence. But I also extended my work to universities and children. And I love helping people and bringing what I know to the table and accompanying them. So I'm also a mom. I think it's important to mention that I have 2 children. So obviously the subject's coming up. It's coming up in school. So they're bringing things home that they've heard, that they've exchanged with other mates, with what teachers have shared them. So I would say also a lot of loving and care that I want to bring to them, to welcome what they're coming with in terms of their feelings, their questions, and being attentive and listening to their concerns. So, yeah.
So let's ask those of you who are watching to also share your answer to this question in the chat. I see a couple of you have identified where you're joining from. Thank you. And maybe you could also share what's a feeling you have around this question. I imagine that we have many feelings, and probably that's part of the complexity. What's one of the, or some of the feelings that you have when you think about talking to children about what's happening in Ukraine and wars in Syria, Afghanistan, many other places in the world in recent years, tragically? Abdullah, I see you're here. I know you have kids. Elke, let's go back to you for a second. You live in Switzerland, I believe.
Exactly. Yes.
And your kids are 9 and 12.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine they're quite cognizant that this war started. I imagine that they have even friends who know refugees, or who maybe they're refugees in your community. How did this start with your own kids? What was one of the kind of first questions they asked you?
Well, wouldn't say necessarily first questions. I think for my son, who's 12, who got his first cell phone at his birthday at the end of last year, came actually with seeing that war needs to stop in Ukraine. So it was an empathy sharing. It's I'm in here, the connectedness with I'm part of this, not extracting himself from that. So really feeling concerned, something is happening. So he didn't necessarily talk about it that much. I actually brought up the topic because I really felt sad for what was happening. So we have a house, we have a luxury, we're living in a big house. So I was evoking the possibility of actually welcoming a family, welcoming somebody. And that was really strong, and I think maybe too overwhelming and for the kids. And they were thinking of the consequences. What if, and how long would that take? So there were many questions in terms of rather this than what was happening. So rather what is happening in the family and what we were thinking of. So that was really strong for them.
Thank you. I'm seeing Dulla's answer here. I imagine with 5-year-olds and a 17-year-old, there's a very complicated range of conversations happening in the house. And I do think it's this, Felice brings up a very difficult point, which is that this conversation is where politics, it's inherently political. And we live in a world with such intensely polarized politics. And Ruth, I imagine that in the north of England, in your school, you might feel like there's a very risky area here for creating division instead of bringing people together in compassion.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I think is so interesting and I wonder if this is a bit of a UK thing, because we are very, we don't talk much about feelings. And I wonder if some of the reticence from parents, both at my school where I'm the head teacher, but also at my grandchildren's school, where they are reluctant to bring this up with their children. They are reluctant to let the news be on in the background. At my granddaughter's school, they've stopped watching over in the UK, we have news rounds, which is a children's version of the news. And they've stopped watching that because it's full of stuff about the Ukraine. And the teachers there are reluctant to engage with that. Because they know that parents are reluctant to engage with that. And I think that is a real, again, a small p political issue that we've got. And I feel, as one would imagine, being involved with 6 Seconds, that actually we need to be much more able to talk about such huge things, even at a very young age. And I feel that it would be that we need parents to be able to trust that as teachers, we will approach it in a very careful way, in a very compassionate way. So for me, there's that push-pull tension with what I feel personally would be a really good way to engage children around the wider debate, but also wanting to make sure that parents understand the reasons behind that. So, I mean, so much of it, not just the situation itself, but the way in which we live our lives is so small p political. And it really does get in the way, I think, of having those really honest, compassionate, nuanced conversations about the really tricky stuff.
Yeah, so it's not just the conversation that we're having, it's the conversation in a larger context, and it's a context with a lot of division and a lot of fear, a lot of isolation. And that context changes a lot based on where we are. Myrna, thank you for sharing over from our LinkedIn live, being in Cyprus. And I imagine that when you yourself have lived through war, I've had some other colleagues at 6 Seconds talk about this, that this is also re-traumatizing. And so as an adult, you're grappling, seeing the images of the war, having lived through that. As a parent, thinking about maybe having been a child in war, there's a lot of complexity here. And I think that complexity often makes us retreat. And I guess one of the questions that I'm wondering about is how do we become more brave? How do we have the fortitude to navigate and not shy away from the difficulty of this conversation? It was an easy question. Elke?
Well, I think, well, obviously, when we think of having those conversations with our children, I mean, it's always like in coaching and the work that you do and with emotional intelligence, the work starts first inward looking, right? Turning ourselves and asking what's there for me. And obviously, if as an adult, I have those very strong emotions of horror, fear, or disgust, or whatever is there, like a deep sadness, and I have difficulties navigating those emotions. I think it's also important to be then being very honest with yourself if you yourself are not ready, and not to have those conversations with your children or with other children, because I think it might have a negative impact, possibly on the children, of saying they will then only sense that highly unpleasant feeling and don't get maybe the message or the intention that we even have of wanting to approach such a difficult subject with them, and also have them to see us, how we are as parents or as educators, being role models for them. How do we deal with them, right? So that they can learn, how can I deal with them and find my own approach or strategies? How can I cope with that? And it just makes me think of the other day at the dinner table, we're talking about a conflict topic with the children, with my children. And they also say, oh, how do you cope with those highly intense emotions? Mom, what are your strategies? And we were brainstorming around the strategies, right? So my son said, well, I love to listen to music or to radio podcasts. And so we're thinking out loud, what can we do? So I think it's highly sensitive, and it's checking in with yourself first of whether you're ready or not, and it's how you're addressing it with the children, right? That's maybe some.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Paulina. Thank you for joining us. And also, we have a couple of other people joining us on the chat. Thank you. We're talking about how to talk to children about the war in Ukraine, war more generally, at school, at home, in the political landscape in which we exist, in the context in which we exist, and also with the difficult emotions that we're grappling with. And we're talking about fear and how it can feel scary to bring up these conversations, and particularly in a political landscape where people are so divided. And I'd like to just address one of the big fears I think parents have, and educators certainly have, is I don't want to upset this child. And if I bring up this, and I think, maybe Paulina, I don't remember how old your younger child is, and Elke's youngest is 9. Ruth, how old is your grandchild?
They're 7 and 10.
7, yeah. So 7. I remember as a parent with when my kids were 5, 6, 7, I thought I shouldn't talk about this thing that happened, because it will rob them of some of this innocence. And I'm wondering, what is, if we could go back in time and I'm having this fear, what would your advice be to me as a parent of a 6-7-year-old?
Is that for me or Paulina or anybody?
You start, Ruth.
I think the big thing for me, and it goes back to what Elke was saying about you need to be very regulated, self-regulation. I think that is huge, because it's about knowing, as Elke said, knowing what you feel, understanding where those feelings are coming from, and then being able to think about the impact that has on you, so that you are ready for those difficult conversations, no matter how old your children, so that you're able to, as you're talking through these things with your children, that not only are you regulated, but you're then in a position to co-regulate. Because I think without that co-regulation, we don't know what we are. We don't know what our children are making of the words that are coming out of our mouths. And I think certainly, you know, I think that's true for us as parents, grandparents, but it's also certainly true for educators, that in the classroom every day, you know, we have to be absolute models of regulation, and we therefore have to make sure that when we're having any kind of difficult conversation, that there is that capacity within ourselves to support the children to co-regulate, so they can start to explore those really tricky feelings, and those feelings that might quickly become overwhelming.
I was just thinking about myself as a parent, and I think I absolutely failed the test of being a consistent role model of self-regulation. But I think I practiced recovering from that. And I think this point that Felice brought up in relation to what Elke said about that there's actually probably some important lesson in our own struggles as adults. And I think sometimes sometimes we pretend like, oh, you know, daddy, mommy has it all figured out, you know, teacher has it all figured out, everything's fine. And we're role modeling something, or we're preaching something that's not true. And maybe teaching an unintended lesson, whereas maybe a little bit more honesty about our own confusion and pain might teach an important lesson. Paulina, you brought that up on a previous live stream. Let's go over to you. What's been going on for you with your own children and the community that you work with in terms of these questions?
Hello, Josh, and hello to everyone. And I'm sorry for being late.
We're glad to have you here.
Excuse me for still hardly breathing, because I was running to be here with you, because I think it's really important. So I'm sorry for my hard breathing now. Probably, I was thinking about that while thinking about that question, that probably the worst thing in EQ is to censor emotions. It's like the censor of information in mass media that we are observing right now. But in EQ, instead of fake news, censoring emotions is creating fake feelings. And nobody promised us a fair world. And how long we can create a fair world for our children. We cannot hide part of the world for them, because that makes us what? Propaganda, probably. What makes us parents is not to create a harmless environment for our children, but to teach them how to react and navigate emotions when challenges just come into our lives. And we are responsible to teach our children that they can count on us. And how will that be a trusted promise if I myself am a liar to them? Never underestimate the power of a child to sense a lie or a hidden truth. We actually forget that we already were in a war, because the COVID pandemic was kind of a war, and it is not still over. We were fighting with each other for a place in the emergency, for oxygen, for medicine, and this was hard for the humanity moment, and for its values, because the first thought that this pandemic the first thought of this pandemic was that it can make us united, that it can learn us to teach us to be together. But when there are times when your doctor can examine you in a week and you need him right now, you're starting a war with all those patients that expect the same doctor to examine them because we want to live. And we probably didn't learn our lesson that no matter we explain those things to our children or not, they crash into reality just like that. And the real effort is on what are they going to learn from that? What are they going to understand? How are their emotions be? How will they express and navigate them? What will they be able to do? How will they share? Will they be able to share? Our children will be part of this, as they were part of the pandemic. And yeah, whether if it's a Ukrainian child in their class, or they meet that child on the playground, or they see something in the social media, they will be part of this war. And it is important that we are there to our children in these moments, because they are expecting us to be. We are the ones as parents that should ask our children, how are they feeling? What do they think? To share and exchange thoughts and feelings about that with them, and to be prepared that this is not going to be our single discussion. It will happen when it's needed, and it should happen. There are things that cannot be fully explained at certain age, because there are still no clear conceptions in the child's mind about them, and it's our job to build this conception. But this is why we need EQ, because everything can be felt, and we can feel together. We can learn to observe and notice when we or our children have those big feelings and share them between one another. Because if we are not there for our children, somebody else will be there. And we don't know that someone wants the best for our children as we do. We don't know how is he going to talk, to interpret this topic, and what will be his influence on our children. So we'd better be there.
Thanks, Paulina. A lot of richness in what you've just shared. And I think that on this theme of authenticity, one of our team members from 6 Seconds Europe, perhaps it's okay to say, I feel scared as an adult. I think a lot of adults would be scared to say, I'm scared. Ruth, it looks like you have a thought or feeling about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, as Paulina was talking, I just thought everything here that she's saying is around how do we build resilience in our young people to be able to manage those difficult emotions when we face pandemics and war and a myriad of many other traumatic things. And to me, it's been so interesting seeing how parents have responded, and not just to the war in Ukraine, but to the difficulties of life as we've gone through the pandemic, for instance, because they feel they want to protect their children from the worst of it. And that is, I feel, can be counterintuitive to actually say, yeah, it's awful what's happening, and it's okay to feel that it's awful, because in being able to express those emotions allows the child to develop that incremental little bit of resilience, and then the next time they have that conversation, that resilience is added to that little bit more, so that it's about finding strategies to think, okay, what can we think, how can we feel, how can we manage those behaviors. So I think resilience is so much part of this conversation, isn't it?
Well, and it makes me think that we could be teaching a lesson, which is you should be calm, or we could be teaching a lesson, which is you should be authentic. And find your way back to calm. And it's like that process, the journey, may be a really powerful lesson. I just wanted to share a couple of comments that came in into the chat here. People resonating with what you were saying, Paulina, about this authenticity and the importance of engaging emotions. Thank you for joining in the chat. Those of you who are here live and those of you who are watching later, please put your comments and thoughts and feelings in the chat, and we will come back and see what you've written and respond to you. I want to go to a topic that Ilaria has brought up about older kids. Ilaria Baffa is one of the 6 Seconds leaders in 6 Seconds Europe. And I think that there are a few comments in the chat that Ilaria brought up, but there's this one theme, which is around, do we increase, do we escalate? Do we escalate into defensiveness? Do we escalate into anger? With a teenager, what are we learning about citizenship? What are we learning about, well, what if our country's invaded? And what is the role that we play? And I'm wondering if you have thoughts, anyone, about this kind of opportunity and challenge of how do we be both peace builders and ask our children to be peace builders, and also talk about the valor of people who are young people, older people, defending their country in Ukraine and going to war. How do we talk to teenagers about this? Elke, you have an almost teenager.
Yes. Well, we're right into there, right? It's already there. Nowadays, it starts so much earlier. I actually had a thought, and I was, when you were mentioning the citizenship and the responsibility, and let the adolescent grow into that more adult role, right, of what is their role and responsibility to play here as a peace builder. And again, I'm starting back again, we need to start with ourselves. And I'm an advocate and a defender of obviously emotional intelligence and using our feelings wisely, of using it as information. And I'm also very much into nonviolent communication from Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, right, who is also obviously with expressing our emotions and what are our needs and how do we communicate with that, right? And how do we bring that first understanding of what's going on within ourselves? How do we start verbalizing it? How are we able, staying with us when we talk about our feelings and just telling a friend of what's going on for us, right? And in any kind of conflicts that they are day in, day out in their school days. So how does that translate into not the short term of where we're in, but also on the longer term perspective, right? How are they in this world, and how do they want to be in this world, right? And what's the way they want to get in contact with other citizens, with other people, with people they know, but also with people who they don't know, who they might have biases and their stereotypes and whatnot. So what is that kind of connection that I want? And I find it highly interesting to start really with this work with themselves and then let them think little in their world and make the circles a little bigger and make them think, okay, what if? And yeah, it's very interesting, and it's let them grow. And that's where I think it's so important to start in an early age, because very abruptly, all of a sudden we think, oh, everything has been fine until the age of 15, 20, whenever parents might feel ready to share uncomfortable and highly uncomfortable emotions with them. But it will be a shock for them, right? And let them get in touch with those emotions and with sadness, and yeah, to say it's okay being sad. Like Ruth said, I was very much with you here and subscribing to it. It's okay with having those difficult feelings of, yeah, it's part of who we are. It's part of our lives, and it's important to feel those feelings too.
I was thinking about my own experience as a child growing up in Berkeley, California, you know, a literally flower child, and then doing a big project many years later, working with the US Navy and Marine Corps and Coast Guard, and spending time with warriors on emotional intelligence, and my own judgments, and confronting my own stereotypes and biases about people who chose to become warriors, and reconciling that for myself and trying to understand that someone can both be a warrior and committed to peace. And I think about that today, again, you know, seeing these people who are like us, you know, who aren't warriors, who are now put in this position of saying, I'm called to defend my country. And I hope that no one else has to make that choice. And I imagine that some of our children, some of our students, they may face that choice. And how do we help them find their way and find their way back to humanity? And I think this place, thinking about what's happening in Ukraine, that's, you know, the sort of ordinary, everyday people, moms and dads who are at war today, that really stirs up a lot of big feelings for me. So what's the conversation we have with our children about, you know, what does Ilaria say to her teenager who's saying, well, would I defend my country? Would I become a warrior? I'm a pacifist. Paulina?
Really a deep topic. Thank you, Ilaria, for bringing it up, actually. I think when talking with teenagers, we should really bring up the topic about the loss of humanity in the war, and actually in the different kinds of war, and make all those parallels with different kinds of war in our everyday life, because they've seen it, they've been part of it, and talk about that. Because yeah, I said it on the last live stream, our children cannot fully experience the horror of the real war, because luckily they are not in the center of it, but what's happening concerns them. And yeah, we should definitely talk about these parallels. The war is not only with guns and bombs, it's when we insult each other, when we stop see each other, when we stop feel each other. There is war on the road. Here in Bulgaria we have this this phrase, the war on the road, because of all the car accidents, when people are dying, children are dying, and there is the war between very, very close people, like actually is the war right now. They were brother nations, and they actually are relatives. I have family friends here in Bulgaria that part of them are Russians and part of them are Ukrainians, and they're relatives, and they're fighting right now, and give and talk about all these examples. I do that. I explain those things, making these parallels with my child. It's like you and your brother having a fight. Every time you stop see each other, you're starting a war between you. You're losing the human connection between you. And the parallel with the aggression in school, it's also an act of war. Every child, every teenager has been a part of that. And if two children are having a fight in our class and one of them is going to seriously harm the other, and we are seeing this and not taking part, as we've seen that someone is doing that, we are probably the worst part in this war.
Yeah, sometimes I use the phrase, going to war in our own hearts. And recognizing in myself that when I am in conflict with somebody, I have patterns of making them bad. And Karen McCowan, one of our founders, talks about the difference between making people good and making people bad. When we make people bad, we hold ourselves above them and we say we're better, they're worse. Sometimes we make ourselves bad and say we're worse. But when we make people, others or ourselves, bad, we contribute to this polarization. We contribute to this escalation. We contribute to the dehumanization, which is what fuels and perpetuates the division, which fuels and perpetuates war, whether it's war with guns or whether it's war with words or whether it's war in our hearts. And the contrast of that is to say, what if we make people good? Not better than us, not ourselves better than them, but we make people, including ourselves, good. And I think that's part of why I care about emotional intelligence.
Probably, Joshua, it's a good time to talk with our children about different kinds of leadership. Taking exactly this war as an example, because we observe two types of leading, and our history is talking about those different types of leaders. They're both leading people, but one of them is leading to death, to cheating, to aggression, dishonest, to poverty, and etc. And the other type of leading is leading people to freedom, to honesty, to human rights, to peace. And the real leaders in history have been always those who can really unite people. So if it's hard for our children, teenagers, to take part, to take side in this situation now, it's their right to not feeling okay with any of the sides, because they're both sides that are fighting. Nobody still is bringing the peace. Yes, we know that one of them is the aggressor and the other one is the victim, but they're both fighting now. Which side can I take when nobody is bringing the peace? So probably it's right to tell our children that I, as a parent, will take that side that can bring the peace here. I want the word peace to not exist anymore, because if it doesn't exist, we will probably not need the word war, not know the word war. So I want the conception of the word peace to be unknown for me.
Well, I want to just bring this comment in from Matt. Thank you for joining us here, Matt, about the idea that really what Paulina, what you're saying is that if we actually create peace inside, it creates a change in the world. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in the world is less inner peace and less outer peace. Elke, let's go back to you. It looked like you had a comment about this question of leadership and what we are learning and teaching our teenagers.
Yeah, I wanted to also build on what Paulina was saying, and it made me think of the importance when you were talking about the leadership to say, okay, how can we connect that to several EQ competencies? And the first one that came to mind was linking it to intrinsic motivation. What are our values, right? Why, right? How are we behaving in this world, and what is truly important to us? And that's why, well, I have a lot of energy, passion that really is vaulting in myself when I feel like there's so much we can do in terms of helping our children, raising their self-awareness, right? Accompanying them and really turning that, again, I'm saying, looking inside, what's happening, what's really important for me. And we know our values change over the course of our life, but accompanying them at a very young age with simple words, with drawing, with different strategies, right? We're not all, and I was thinking earlier on, I'm very much into the verbal. I love the speaking part, but we're all different, and children are different. I hear regularly from my older one, Mom, make it short, right? So they need sequenced bits and pieces, but not too long, but joke away. But so there might be other ways of helping them express what's in their side. So drawing a body and seeing, okay, what can I see from the outside? But what are the invisible bits and pieces that I can't see? But what if I open that book? What is inside? Oh, friendship. What is that? And it's about really touching about philosophically having conversations with them and bringing that to the schools and having them talk to each other. Okay, I see it that way. Oh, I see it that way. Oh, that's interesting. But we're talking about the same thing and the concept here, but we have different definitions of maybe the same set of values and what is here. And interesting, it changes. So I do work a lot with adults and helping them also in their professional development to see, what is the foundation? And the foundation, those are a set of values, right? And helping the children to grow into that and not be surprised at an adult life to say, didn't know it exists. So there's so much to do, and I feel really passionate about helping contribute.
Yeah, so there's big questions there around how are we making decisions? And are we making decisions out of reaction, out of pattern, out of what other people think, out of social pressures? And I think maybe for Ilaria's question for her teenager, part of the richness is not here's what you should decide, but how would you decide? How would you make that decision? As somebody who is essentially an adult, you're going to be faced with decisions like this. Hopefully not this one. How will you make it? Ruth?
Yeah, I think that's key, isn't it? Because this is about making sure that they've got the information that they need in order to be able to start to pull it together and make not necessarily informed choices, but to feel more secure about how they feel about one side or the other. And it's very much about making sure that our young people understand, regardless of the perception of the perpetrator and the victim, or however else we want to describe it, but it's about making sure that we all come at certain problems from different angles, from different perspectives. And so it is about that understanding that we feel that we have that moral high ground almost, and when we're talking about what's happening in Ukraine, it seems to me, and probably to all of us here, there's a very clear moral position to take, but understanding that actually we feel like that, but others won't. And it's allowing that conversation around recognizing other people's perceptions are no more, no less important than your own, and understanding that it's never as simple as saying, well, I'm in the right and you're in the wrong, but we actually have to have that just that exploration of where other people are coming from. And I think that really links into, you know, thinking about the 8 competencies, thinking about this is about increasing empathy, isn't it? And not necessarily immediately judging or reacting, but thinking much more responsively and responsibly about how other people find themselves in that position. And that's really tricky stuff for young people, because it's hard enough to find your own position in this world when you're young and just starting out. But I think that's kind of on us as the adults to be giving them that space and capacity and knowledge and confidence that they can start to explore these big issues.
Well, we're coming towards the end of our hour. I want to turn the question back to us ourselves as parents and educators. We've talked about some of the challenges. We've talked about some of our own feelings. How has emotional intelligence, or how is emotional intelligence helping you can navigate this complexity for yourself? What are you practicing right now as a parent and educator to step into this conversation? Paulina, can we go to you?
Yeah. How is emotional intelligence helping me now? Remembering how important it is to be together, the connection on the human level between us all. To talk about feelings, to share experiences, to learn how to feel together. This is exactly how EQ is helping me, not just now, but through the COVID pandemic as well, and actually always. And not just to know that it is important to be together, but to find and recognize the people who are ready and worthy to walk with you in this, because not everybody can. EQ is helping me to recognize those relationships and to put my efforts in them, and to know which ones are a waste of time because they are not investing in togetherness and in peace. This is how.
Thanks, Paulina. Someone else? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
I guess it's that empathy. It's that whole thing around empathy. And, you know, when I feel angry, trying to recognize that my anger isn't actually necessarily doing very much in the here and now to change that situation for anybody. And so, you know, recognizing that it's what I do with that, or how, or the words that I use to describe that. So not going down that reactive path and being that judgmental person that says this is wrong. I mean, you know, it's going back to that moral position, isn't it? And recognizing just where do I put myself on that continuum of emotions around this particular issue or situation, and not giving in to those emotions that aren't going to help, and remembering that it's not just me, it's not just my immediate family, it's not just it is as Paulina says, it's that human connection. So rather than feeling constrained by anger and feeling negativity, that it's about reaching out and building bridges always.
Nyamka, welcome from Cameroon. Others who are answering in the chat, talking about role modeling, about our own regulation, and being able to engage with our emotions, even the difficult ones, to do that out loud with our children, with one another, and not join the the fake news, the fake emotion news. I wanted to touch on this one from Abdullah, because this is for sure for me. I find myself feeling hopeless and helpless and saying, you know, this is what I've been doing. This is my life work, and it's not working. And, you know, losing hope. And I'm wondering, what's helping you find hope? I think hope is more the feeling, and then optimism is hope with a plan. Optimism is when we put the effort in with our hope, but there's this emotional piece of saying that it's possible. And on some days I wake up feeling that, and in some days it just seems like the powers of division are too strong. What's giving you hope, Ruth?
I love the sort of the definition, if you like, around exercising, you know, around optimism, which is around hope and possibility for the future. So it's the possibility of what we do next. It's the possibility of how we build those bridges, and being able to, you know, we're talking about things on this huge global scale, and when we're on our own, when we think we're on our own, it is overwhelming. It does feel incredibly pessimistic. And yet, if we recognize that, you know, there is a common thread that joins us all, and that there is a common humanity that we need to build on, that gives us that hope and possibility for the future. And it can be as simple as, you know, our school have been collecting donations for Ukrainian families, for Ukrainian refugees in this country, but also for parcels to be sent to Poland and to Berlin and to Germany, where the key points are for refugees from Ukraine. And that to me is it's only tiny, it's a tiny, tiny measure, but that gives me a feeling of hope and possibility for the future, because we're encouraging others around us to think more broadly about our fellow human beings. So that's the bit that gives me hope, no matter how small.
Well, and sometimes a small scrap is what we need. Welcome to a new person from in the chat. Matt, thank you for this comment that EQ is a pathway. And maybe we didn't have this before. I certainly didn't learn about this when I was growing up. And I think that I would be better at it now if I had. And then this sense of compassion, that when we step into compassion, that actually strengthens connection, and that actually opens up possibility. And I think there's an important, in the 6 seconds model, this piece about give yourself, when we feel that sense of connectedness with one another, with our own future, that sense of connectedness itself becomes a pathway to say, oh, well, maybe I do have more choices. Maybe I have more options. And maybe there's more to be aware of. What's giving you hope, Paulina?
I was thinking about the same things that you were talking, that yeah, my efforts are not working, and this stuck into my mind because I already said that the COVID pandemic made me think that probably this is going to make us more united, but it didn't. At least in Bulgaria, it didn't. We were polarized more than ever after it. So there are so many lessons we have to learn. And now this war, and I was so hopeless, really hopeless. And I want to share a story from the last days that actually brought me hope. And I want to share it with you, Josh, because I know that you will appreciate it, because I know you feel the same way like I do. And it's really from the last days. It's about to children. You know that my job here in Bulgaria is bringing social emotional learning to the teachers and parents and children, of course. And two children from a school I work with created an IT project, a website for EQ, full with resources for teachers and parents and children, all free, and games and etc. And they did it with the support of their teachers and their parents collaboratively, just like I always knew that it should happen, that social emotional learning should happen. And they actually combined STEM, system, technology, engineering, maths, and social emotional learning in one. And this is something that Bulgarian government has never the capacity to do. And those kids did it. And this is really giving me hope, because our work in Bulgaria influenced, obviously not institutions like the Ministry of Education, but influenced teachers, parents, and now children. They were so inspired that they become creators by themselves. You realize that this is meaning that in times of when we are talking that our children don't listen, they are not motivated, they are only consumers, we have creators. And I cried. And children are the center of our efforts after all, and they hold tomorrow's peace in their hands. And now I know our efforts worth it. And I will never give up. And you should never give up, because it's worth it.
Thank you, Paulina. I think that it's crucial for us to shift our relationship with children and to see them not as the recipients, but as not as future leaders, but as leaders.
And as shapers.
Yeah. Elke, what's giving you hope?
What's giving me hope? Many things do give me hope. And first of all, the work of 6 seconds gives me hope, because that's fantastic. I'm not wanting to pay you any, anything that you don't deserve, but there's so much beautiful things going on, networks, and creating synergies, because I do feel we all have wisdom, we all have skills and competencies, and we're all different, and we're complementary in our approaches. And together we're stronger, right? It's that collectiveness, the collective intelligence, and it's also paying attention. I feel what you pay attention to will grow. So if we pay attention to what's not working, well, we'll only focus on, my brain will be focused on seeing what's not working. But if I will focus on what's there, what's positive, associations, the work of communities, of the individuals, of groups, of networks, of NGOs, of organizations, everything, if I focus on that, that gives me hope. And for myself also, connecting to myself, to my passions, connecting to my values, to what is my little puzzle that I want to bring to the world? What is the world that I like, and what is the one thing that I would like to change to make it a better place? So that's giving me hope, and it's generating energy. And obviously I have my ups and downs, as we all do have, and just having the model in mind, also saying, okay, putting things into perspective. How can I see things positively? And I think of the bridges of optimism. I'm thinking of, okay, is that temporary nature? What is my vision? So really helping with what's there at present, but what is the plan? And I'm in I identify with what you were saying in the optimism part of really being positive about it and having a plan. There is a plan, and you have a plan. You have fantastic material. We're learning, we're bringing it to the world, and we'll make it, but we need to be patient. And for me, that's my big learning. I want to do things. I'm getting impatient because I feel like there's so many things we can do, but I need to learn to be patient and yeah, take the time that it needs. And it does take time, but it will be coming. Thanks to all of you.
I wanted to appreciate your comment, Afruz. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. And thinking about these 17 and 18-year-olds. And actually, your comment is giving me hope, because what I hear in this is that there's a conversation happening about emotions. And my thought is, we don't need to make them feel better. We need to make space for them to feel what they're feeling. And I think that's the gift. You noticing what they're feeling and saying, yeah, that is scary. And I'm scared too. I put our contact link in the chat. If any of you, Afruz, anyone else, wants some more resources, some more tools for this conversation with your own children, with your students, we do have a lot of free resources available to share. I also want to mention that we have our EQ cafes happening right now around empathy and conflict. And we hadn't known there was going to be a new war, but we did know that empathy has gone down in the world in the last 5 years, and conflict is going up. And perhaps that's a recipe for war, whether it's war in our own hearts, war in our playgrounds, war in our communities, or war between nations. And we have tools. It's hard to use these tools, but we have tools. And maybe it's the most important work that we can do, is to strengthen our connections with ourselves and with one another. So panelists, thank you for being here. Everyone who's watching either live or on the recording, thank you for joining us. Please share your comments, and we will continue these conversations and continue to do this work, starting with ourselves.